Hi guys, welcome back to the Mind Body Her podcast. I'm your host, Mia Schick, registered holistic nutritionist. On today's podcast episode, we are going to be taking a deep dive into iron. Iron 101, we're going to be talking about what it does in the body, why it's so important, the signs of low iron, things, and some of the populations that are most susceptible to depletion, how you can optimize your absorption, and we'll talk some supplementation at the same time and some tips and tricks around that to bring up your iron stores. So iron deficiency is one of the most common nutrient deficiencies that I would say I see in practice. I'm willing to bet about 9 out of 10 of the women that I see are iron deficient. And the problem is it's just not talked about and it's not understood of how it is manifesting as a lot of our symptoms. And there's a lot of overlapping signs and symptoms for common hormonal balances like high cortisol, low cortisol, burnout, and even hypothyroidism too. And so oftentimes it's just glazed over, they get their labs back and everything's kind of quote unquote normal, but then you're not feeling normal, right? And so that's where we need to be taking a deeper look. And I ask pretty much every single one of my clients to go and get their iron levels checked, especially if energy is an issue for them. Or I will look at their labs, their last labs that they had, and take a better look and assess it if we need to. So it's very, very important. First and foremost, iron. Iron it makes hemoglobin. It's a protein that carries oxygen in our red blood cells. It's really important for iron production. It's important for our mitochondria to produce ATP. It's really important for our thyroid hormone metabolism. Iron is actually a cofactor in thyroid hormone conversion. And as I mentioned, a lot of symptoms can overlap with low iron and low thyroid. And I am willing to bet that a lot of women who are hypothyroid probably had iron deficiency before that showed up and it was never addressed. Immune function, so really important for our immune cells, our white blood cells, for cell signaling, for brain function. It's really important for the synthesizing of dopamine and serotonin, our happy hormones. It has a lot of jobs and a lot of different roles. The biggest signs of low iron typically include things like fatigue. If you are somebody that no matter how long you sleep, you maybe get 8 hours of sleep and you wake up in the morning and you feel tired and you just feel like you drag yourself all throughout the day. Could be a sign of low iron. If you get really fatigued or feel weak, or maybe you're exercising, you get out of breath, maybe you're going up a set of stairs, you get really out of breath quite easily. If you struggle with things like brain fog, trouble concentrating, low mood, if you're irritable, maybe you're somebody that gets a lot of headaches, you can't focus, poor exercise tolerance, like I mentioned, and hair loss would be another one. If you're in the shower washing your hair and you notice that hair is coming out a little bit more than normal, brushing your hair. Restless legs is also another one. And sometimes it can even show up as things like non-food cravings, cravings for things like ice or dirt. Sometimes that can be common in pregnancy, actually, and in a specific eating disorder called pica. So let's talk about what are some of the common causes of depletion? What are some of the people that should be more concerned with making sure their iron levels are up to snuff, so to speak? The first one is just going to be overall low iron intake. So I'm always very concerned if I have someone who's maybe under eating, maybe they've done a lot of dieting or restricted diet, or maybe they're following certain protocols or just have kind of very limited diet. That would be the first place to look, is if we're actually getting enough iron in our diet. We'll talk a little bit further along about what good food sources, and different types of iron sources are best for our body and for absorption. That's also going to fall into areas like vegan diets. We're not, properly planning out our diets and paying attention to adequate iron. That can be a big one right there. Not eating enough protein if someone has really heavy menses, so very heavy cycles is a big one. Another area is actually poor absorption. Maybe you're actually eating enough iron, getting it through your food, but we're not absorbing it. The biggest contributors I see to that are things like low stomach acids. We don't have enough acidity in our stomach, especially to break things down like protein, and help with break down minerals and absorb minerals. That can be a big one. It's called hypochlorhydria, low stomach acid. If you're somebody that experiences, if like you're burping or you get a lot of acid reflux after meals, or you notice undigested food in the stool after you eat, those could all be signs of low stomach acid. Halitosis, bad breath, even acne can all be signs of low stomach acids. There are a couple of ways that you can test to see if your stomach acid is low. One, you can try some apple cider vinegar and see if you get a burning sensation when you have that before a meal. You can also try hydrochloric acid tablets. It's a little bit trickier. You'd want to do that testing ideally with a practitioner. And that's where you take one hydrochloric acid pill and you kind of keep taking one until you get that burning sensation. And so if you're having to take a whole bunch of HCl, then that can be some signs that you might be on the lower end of the spectrum. Also just really common for human beings as we get older for our stomach acid production to decline. So I see this a lot of even clients that are kind of in their late 50s and 60s and 70s with low stomach acid. The other sign there too might be if you eat protein-rich meals and they feel like they just kind of sit there and don't move through the system. We really need to be working on overall digestive function, which we'll talk a little bit more as. H. pylori is another one. H. pylori is a little bacteria that likes to wedge itself in the lining of the stomach, and it can only survive in a low acidic environment. And so it actually has mechanisms that influence our cells that produce hydrochloric acid, therefore lowering the acidity in our stomach so that they can survive. H. pylori is very common. Around 50% of the population actually carries H. pylori, but some people don't have any symptoms around it or it's not contributing to that. You can get it tested through your doctor. Again, if you have some of the signs and symptoms that I mentioned before, lots of gas and burping, feel that burning sensation in your stomach often, you feel like food just sits there like a brick, then you can get some testing done through your doctor or through a comprehensive stool test like a GI map. Celiac, so if you're allergic to gluten or sensitive to gluten, that can influence our lining of the intestine and inhibit absorption. Dysbiosis, so things like small intestinal bacteria, overgrowth, candida infections, all can contribute to that as well. Crohn's, ulcerative colitis. So really need to be working on overall digestive function and also paying attention to any pathogen overgrowth, parasitic infections, things like that can also influence iron absorption. The thing to think about that is that if we have pathogens in our digestive system, they actually need iron to grow. They feed off of iron. So that's why if you have something going on with your digestive system and then you just throw in an iron supplement, you're actually adding to that equation. You need to go in first and foremost and clean up anything that's going on in your digestive system before we look at adding in a supplement, because you might end up making matters worse or just not having any influence on. This might be something to look at if you are that person who's like, I've been taking iron supplements and my iron levels haven't changed. My ferritin has stayed the same, or maybe it's gone down. That might be because you're not looking at what's going on with your digestive health and function. Take a peek at bacteria overgrowth, pathogen overgrowth, maybe even parasitic infections. And same thing there, you can get some testing done through your doctor or do a GI map, a stool test to analyze things a little bit further and implement a protocol to support your digestive function. The other thing I wanted to mention is inflammation overall. If we have higher levels of inflammation in the body, it increases a peptide hormone called pepsidin. And so this acts kind of like a master regulator of iron in the body. And if we have chronic levels of inflammation, our body is kind of a protective mechanism, eats up that iron and stores it. So sometimes we can have false and high levels of especially ferritin, which is a storage form of iron in the liver. If your levels are really elevated and you're still having some of those signs and symptoms that I mentioned, then I would take a peek at what your inflammation levels are doing. And I would also cross-test and get my C-reactive protein to see if my inflammation markers are elevated, causing some false high levels of specifically ferritin. The other thing to think about endurance athletes, if you're someone who is a long distance runner, maybe you're running 10Ks or half marathons, and I would even say if you're somebody who's like an avid CrossFitter or you're working out a ton, you really need to be looking at supporting your iron levels, specifically with things like running when our foot is hitting the pavement. It's called foot strike hemolysis. So that repeated running can actually damage or destroy the red blood cells and increase iron turnover. It also can create these little micro tears in the gut that actually lead to a little bit of bleeding, therefore further contributing to iron depletion. And we also lose some iron in our sweat at the same time. Pregnancy, if you're listening to this and you're thinking about getting pregnant anytime in the near future, please work on increasing your iron stores, because if you go into your pregnancy with an iron deficiency, you're not going to have a fun time. And in worst case scenario, if we do have low iron, it actually can lead things to like having your baby early. Important blood volume doubles during pregnancy, and it's really important important for supporting the fetus and the placenta. And your iron intake actually, it doesn't quite double, but the needs for a woman in pregnancy, her iron needs are quite significantly more than a woman who is not pregnant. And we'll talk about that here as well. So I want to talk a little bit about testing and what to look for on your own labs. Always a good idea. If you're unsure, you don't really know what your labs look like, then maybe work with a practitioner or someone with myself who can look at your labs, be able to interpret them and see if this is contributing to some of your overall health profile. One of the biggest ones that I typically look at is ferritin. I've touched on this a little bit, but ferritin is the storage form of iron in your liver, and it can be a good place to start to tell you if you have adequate iron levels. But also it doesn't tell you the whole picture, right? So you might get your iron levels back and maybe they're really elevated. We want to come back and look at things like our inflammation levels. We can also look at serum iron. So that's going to tell us what's currently available in our bloodstream. Transferrin saturation, that's going to tell us how well our iron is being transported. And then our complete blood count will show if it's affecting our red blood cells. So that takes a little bit, knowing a little bit more about that in order to implement interpretation there. And also look at B12. B12 is really important for and essential for utilizing iron as well. What I usually do, so I would look at the reference range, right? Usually they're very, very broad. So as I mentioned, it's not just okay to fall within that range. We want to be looking at the optimal ranges. So typically for ferritin, if you want good energy, you want nice thick hair, you want to be aiming for up around 70, which I have rarely seen, even for myself. I struggle. I've gotten up to about 60 and I've gone back and forth here and there. But if you want to have good energy, good mood, nice hair, nice skin, nice nails, I would aim for up and around 70 with your ferritin levels. For the other ones, maybe look at that, take that range, go to the midpoint and see where you fall on the upper higher end, on the lower end, and then maybe to have a better picture of what your iron levels are at. Next, I wanted to talk about optimizing your iron absorption. So first and foremost, we want to be getting it through the diet, as I mentioned, eating foods that are high in iron and in particular heme iron. So heme iron comes from animal sources. I'm sorry if you're vegan or vegetarian, but I do believe, just from my knowledge and experience and professional background, I do think human beings need to have some quality animal protein in their diet. I just have seen too many people with nutrient deficiencies and really impacting their energy and especially their mood. Heme iron is the most readily absorbed in the body as opposed to non-heme iron, which is going to come from plant sources. Not to say that we shouldn't be including those, but I would look at heme iron first and foremost. There are some the foods that are going to be highest in this are going to be actually some kinds of seafood. So oysters are going to be the highest. Oysters, clams, and mussels, incredibly nutrient dense. So if you like those, hopefully you can get those into your diet. Then we're going to be looking at things like organ meats like beef liver, chicken liver. I will tell you guys, I'm not a huge fan. I just don't like the flavor or the texture. But if you are somebody that does, or maybe you want to incorporate it in like a pate form, then that could be an option for you. And then we're going to be looking into like red meats, darker meats, and poultry, beef, bison, venison, dark turkey meat, chicken thighs, those sorts of things. And then eggs and sardines are also high in iron. Ideally getting in some of that a couple of times per day, if we can, is ideal. Then we look at the non-heme iron from plant sources. Some of the challenges when we have things like beans and legumes that are higher in iron is they also have phytates. So this is a kind of like a coating, a protective coating around the lentils and the beans, and that can actually block absorption. The way around that is to actually soak them. So what I usually like to do is buy beans and legumes dry, and then I soak them really well overnight with a little bit of baking soda, sometimes a splash of vinegar, rinse them really well, cook them really well, and that can help with that and help break down that phytates or phytic acid around it. Non-heme iron, so again, that's going to be from plant sources. Lentils, beans, chickpeas, tofu, and tempeh. Soybeans are actually very high in iron. Pumpkin seeds are really great. Hemp hearts, tahini, and sesame. Quinoa, spinach, blackstrap molasses, and then things like fortified cereals and breads will also have some iron in there as well. I actually really like to make a smoothie with things like tahini and blackstrap molasses and some banana and spinach in there for a really nice nutrient dense smoothie, making pumpkin seed Milk is also a great idea as well. And so things when we're having those foods just to help with, again, that iron absorption is to have those types of foods actually away from things like coffee and tea. Those have polyphenols and tannins that actually inhibit absorption. And we also want to be making sure that we are taking, if you are taking in an iron supplement, to be taking it away from things that are higher doses in calcium and zinc and magnesium. So splitting that up. Um, and away from antacids as well. So if you are taking things like an antacid or a PPI, taking your iron away from that, or having your meals that are rich in higher iron away from those at the same time. Let's just talk about iron supplementation. As I mentioned, this isn't necessarily that everybody that has low iron should just immediately jump into an iron supplement. Especially if you have some things going on with your digestion, then again, I would work there first. Work on adding some foods into your diet. And then if you still need a supplement, to work on that, because that will give you some relief for sure. And even doing things like an iron infusion, maybe through the doctor, the naturopath, just to help bring your stores up and make you feel better temporarily. But for iron supplementing, typically when you take it, morning is going to be the best. Ideally on an empty stomach, but if that's not the case, sometimes people get a little bit nauseous from taking it on an empty stomach. Then have it with a little bit of food, have it with your breakfast. But our stomach acid typically should be highest, especially in the morning. So again, we're more likely to break it down, actually absorb it. Nighttime sometimes can be recommended if you have an upset stomach, but you just want to watch and see if your iron has things like B vitamins in it, which sometimes can make it harder for us to fall asleep. B vitamins are very energizing and help with energy production. So sometimes it can have that effect as we get going to sleep. But if it's just an iron supplement, there's nothing else, just like an iron citrate or bisglycinate, then you should be okay there. Iron also, alternate day dosing can actually help to improve tolerance and absorption. Comes back to that hepcidin, that peptide hormone that sometimes can lock it away. It'll lower in between dosage, helping you build up your iron stores a little bit better. Sometimes it's a little bit challenging to take that and remember to do it every other day, but if you can, that's actually best. And the bonus is you're not going to spend as much money on iron supplements because you're taking it every other day as opposed to day. A few other things. I will put a list of my favorite supplements for iron. I have a few. One is going to be Ferropro. That's kind of my tried and true. It's a combination of iron. It's got some folate, vitamin C, some B vitamins in there. It's very gentle. I found that I take that one myself when my iron levels tend to be on the lower end. Mega Food Blood Builder, that's a whole food iron supplement. Ideally, if we can get our supplements in whole food form, we're much more likely to actually absorb it versus more synthetic forms. That's another one that's my favorite. Heme iron would be another source, and iron bisglycinate are kind of my two favorite forms of iron. The other thing to think about if you do suspect low stomach acid is to take maybe some digestive enzymes or take betaine HCl with your meals to help bring that acid up and break your food down a little bit better. If you're B12 deficient, a methylated B12, I like to take it sublingually, so underneath my tongue. So therefore, it's not going through my digestive system. So as mentioned, got issues there, probably not absorbing it anyways, right? So we want to get right into our bloodstream. A methylated B12 sublingual is my go-to, or you can look at getting some shots done with a naturopathic doctor to bring up your B12 levels, but ultimately we need to be addressing why our B12's low in the first place. Beef liver supplements very high in iron, so you could look at pulling that in there, but just be careful if you struggle with histamine issues, as sometimes that can trigger histamine response. Herbal supports, so nettles, so doing herbal infusions, doing like a nettle tea can be really nice. Chlorophyll, adding some green drops into your water every other day also can just be a nice way to build up your overall minerals. Cast iron, cooking foods in cast iron, and doing an iron fish. So it's just a little iron fish that you can drop into things like soups and stews that help bring up the iron, or another couple of easy ways to support that. If you are somebody that you don't know how much iron you're getting, or if it's getting, what food sources have enough iron in it, you could use a tracking program like Chronometer, a lot of like online food tracking programs. So like things like MyFitnessPal, those sorts of things. They only really look at your overall caloric intake and your macro breakdown, doesn't really look at your micro breakdown. So your micronutrients, your vitamins and minerals, but Chronometer does. So this and can give you a better idea if you are getting adequate nutrients in from a more broader perspective and learn a little bit more. So when we are looking at the RDA, so recommended dietary allowance of what's recommended, how many milligrams of iron we should be getting per day. For most adult women between the ages of 19 and 15, it's around 18 milligrams per day. Postmenopausal women, 51 plus, 8 milligrams per day. So our need for it goes down quite significantly when we don't have our menses, obviously, but still want to make sure we're getting amounts. And then in pregnancy, so as I mentioned, so for adult women, 18 milligrams per day. Pregnancy, it's actually 27 milligrams per day. So significantly, a significant amount more. So again, really, really important to optimize that. I hope you enjoyed this little mini lesson on iron. This is one of my favorite topics. And as I mentioned, not something to just glaze over. Please pull up your last labs, take a peek at that, check in with yourself, see if you have any of those underlying symptoms that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, and then really look at your overall diet, look at your digestion, and looking at optimizing it. If you need some support with this, if you're having a challenge, maybe with your digestion, there's some things going on there, you have a suspicion that this might be contributing to some of your low iron symptoms, then let's have a chat. We can look at running some functional testing, like do the GI map, come up with a personalized protocol to help you heal your gut and be able to absorb your food so that you have that energy to do all the things that you want to do. Or if you're just looking to optimize your overall nutrition, then let's have a chat, book in a session with me, and we can take a deep dive into what's going to you specifically and come up with a plan. I will put links to the supplements that I mentioned in this episode below, so you can go and take a peek at that. When you click on the full script account, you just have to scroll down a little bit and it'll show up as under my protocols. And then you can see all the supplement recommendations I have there. And I'll also put a link to book in a discovery call or book in an initial consultation to get the ball rolling. I hope you save this. I hope you share this with somebody, and stay tuned for next week for the next episode on Mind, Body, Her. Thanks, you guys.